The New Orleans Saints are bringing in a veteran cornerback for a visit, so let's break down a potential Dre Kirkpatrick signing on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode here, Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Whether you're listening on your favorite podcast provider or watching on YouTube, thank you very much for being here. And don't forget that we're here with you every single Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, covering your New Orleans Saints. On today's episode, the New Orleans Saints are bringing in veteran cornerback Dre Kirkpatrick for a visit today. So we're going to take a look at three main aspects around a potential Dre Kirkpatrick signing for the Saints. One, we're going to start with the player. Who is Dre Kirkpatrick? Then we'll look at the fit. What does he bring to a team like New Orleans? And then we'll wrap up by looking at the position, what it means for other corners on the roster, and would the Saints be done at the cornerback position on the open market if this signing does happen? We'll talk about all of that on today's episode. And as always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, co-managing editor over at CanalStreetChronicles.com, and your Tuesday co-host over at the Locked On NFL podcast. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints, your team every day. And as we get rolling with today's episode, don't forget to go and check out the Peacock and Williamson NFL show, our flagship NFL show here on the Locked On Podcast Network. All the news that you need from around the league in one place with the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Go and check them out on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast. So look, this is the bottom line for me when people keep asking me about what I think about the Saints potentially signing Dre Kirkpatrick. We'll start with the player here. Dre Kirkpatrick fits the Saints' free agent corner profile to a T and would be an absolutely logical signing for the team. Let's talk about why. So he spent 9 years in the NFL so far, 8 with the Cincinnati Bengals, 1 last season with the Arizona Cardinals. 6'2", 190 pounds. So he fits the size profile that the Saints really like. And he fits some of these other notions as well. I mean, he can take the ball away, 13 career interceptions, but that includes only 2 seasons where he played 13 or more games and had 0 interceptions. So he doesn't really pile all these on into one season. He's remained consistent over the course of his career with those 13 picks. Now, he is 31 years old, but as I mentioned, he fits the free agency profile for the Saints to a T when it comes to this cornerback position. The Saints have not been afraid to invest in veteran corners, particularly here over the recent years. You look at both Patrick Robinson and Janoris Jenkins, both of them, when the Saints added them to their roster, 31 years old at the time of their signing. So the Saints are not afraid to invest in a veteran corner opposite Marshon Lattimore. So now there are some injury concerns a little bit when it comes to Dre Kirkpatrick. He's never played a full 16-game season, but he's played a lot of 13, 14, 15 game seasons throughout his career. Played only 6 games in 2019, however, but bounced back in 2020 and had a nice season there. Now, he wasn't a full-time starter with the Cincinnati Bengals right off the bat. And this is something else to keep in mind when it comes to his production. He really only started 2 or 3 games his second and third season, and then in his very first season, he only appeared in 5 as a rookie. So it wasn't really until 2015 that he was promoted to a full-time starter. Unfortunately, in that season, he had 0 interceptions after getting 6, despite the fact that he only started 5 total games before that over the first 2 seasons, or the second and third seasons of his career in 2013 and 2014. Now, he appeared in a lot of games during those seasons, but didn't start a ton, but still put up a ton of production. So that production, again, although he had that 0 interception season at that point and would have 1 later on, he's remained consistent over the course of his career thus far. Now, we talked a bit about Dre Kirkpatrick and even Darqueze Dennard, former teammate with the Cincinnati Bengals last season, just before the combine or right after the combine. And we talked about him with Kat Terrell, who now, of course, is back covering the Saints with The Athletic, but did spend some years in Cincinnati for ESPN covering the Bengals. And she mentioned at that time that he would be a great fit She echoes the same sentiment this year that he would be a good fit and a logical signing for the Saints. Did mention to us that he has some, let's say, penalty concerns, maybe some handsiness that you might want to be aware of. But when you look at him over the course of his career, 54 penalties over 9 seasons, that's 6 penalties a year. In a passing league where you get a lot of flags in favor of wide receivers and quarterbacks, that's not terrible because, in fact, it's not much different than Janoris Jenkins. We're going to talk about a lot of parallels with Janoris Jenkins in the next segment because these two are eerily similar to one another. But Janoris Jenkins, over the course of his 10-year career, 59 penalties during that time, so 5.9 per year. So both of them at 6 per year. You're not really adding anything different than what you had in Janoris Jenkins at that time. And, the other side of this is that you can look at, Dre Kirkpatrick's effectiveness last year in the passing game. Again, not really a ball hawk, but definitely somebody that can affect the catch point. And you can still see that at this point in his career with 3 interceptions and 7 passes defended last season with the Arizona Cardinals. Now, here's the other question. Can the New Orleans Saints afford him? And this, of course, is going to be key because the Saints right now sit with about $348,000 of salary cap space. And remember, Drew Brees' retirement still has not become financially official in terms of the NFL transaction wire. So according to the NFLPA and their public salary cap, the Saints are under $350,000 in salary. So how could they afford a guy like Dre Kirkpatrick? I would say that the answer to this is simple, and in plain terms it is, but we like to get to the nitty gritty here when it comes to contracts. So let's break it down. Dre Kirkpatrick's last contract last season with the Arizona Cardinals was a veteran minimum contract, which at the time was $1.05 million. This year, it's $1.75 million. Each year, that minimum goes up. And then, of course, depending upon how long you have been in the NFL, that total goes up as well. Someone that's been in the NFL for 1 or 2 years has a lower guaranteed minimum as a veteran than somebody that has been in the NFL for 7+ years, which is where Dre Kirkpatrick is. However, when it comes to the salary cap hit on the team, so not the amount that's being paid out to the player, but the amount that counts against the salary cap, no matter what, any qualifying contract for any of those veteran, later career veterans, their contract counts against the team salary cap as a second-year player. This is key. This is called the veteran minimum salary benefit. So the thing about this is that it ends up lowering the hit that a team takes by investing in a veteran player in the NFL. This keeps veterans employed and affordable. So the contract for a vet minimum Dre Kirkpatrick would be $1.075 million with a small roster bonus of about $137,000. Let's just say it that way. But that 1.075 doesn't count against the Saints salary cap. Instead, $850,000 would count against the salary cap because that's the second year total plus the roster bonus. So you're really looking at, instead of paying out $1.075 million, instead of paying out over $1 million, you're paying out just under $1 million at right around $987,000. The reason why this is key is because, yes, the Saints still only have $350,000 available, basically, but once Drew Brees' contract and retirement become financially official, that's going to evacuate the salary cap on the Saints books, and then Dre Kirkpatrick would slide right in without a player jumping into the top 51 like we were talking about a couple days ago. It would be a pretty clean swap from one player to another. So yes, the Saints can afford Dre Kirkpatrick should they decide to sign him. So that's all that it would take. So there are lots of ways for the Saints to get this done, but the next part about all of this is going to be the schematic fit. Is Dre Kirkpatrick a schematic fit for the team, and what does it mean for the rest of the team around him? We'll talk about that as we continue on. It's another episode today of Locked On Saints. And don't forget that today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at rockauto.com. We got into the nitty-gritty about contracts there for a moment. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty in terms of car care, rockauto.com is the perfect resource for you because any part, piece, or accessory that you're looking for, Rock Auto is going to have. Oh, and it doesn't matter what type of car you're driving either. They're going to have it for you. So if you're driving, a standard car today, a modern car today, and you need to give it a repair, or if you're somebody that likes to rebuild classics, rockauto.com is a site that you need to make sure that you frequent and is a part of your catalog, particularly for looking for the parts, pieces, and accessories that you need. So go and check them out over at rockauto.com. Don't forget to let them know that Locked On sent you by writing Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section, which is just below the shipping information at checkout. It's Rock Auto, amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. So after the Atlanta Falcons traded away Julio Jones to the Tennessee Titans, the win total didn't change, right? They're still expected to be over at BetOnline BetOnline.ag. A 7.5 win team is the win total for them, but you can bet over that. You can bet under that, but under has now become the favorite. So if you want to get in on that action at all, you can also get in on the Tennessee Titans, whose win total went up from 9 to 9.5. I think they're a double-digit win team, so we're taking the over on that one. At least that's what I'm going to try to do. But when it comes down to it, if you want to get on the action on your own, go and check out betonline.ag. And don't forget to use the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, because when you make your free account, you'll put money in that you're going to use to bet. And that promo code locked on is going to get you a 50% welcome bonus on top of what you're putting down. So if you're putting down $100, this is going to get you an extra $50 in free play to get you started with your first deposit. That's promo code locked on over at BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. All right, family, continuing on with another episode of Locked On Saints, talking about Dre Kirkpatrick. We broke down the player. Now let's take a look at the fit with the team. And the fact of the matter is that Dre Kirkpatrick is a schematic fit and would become the presumed starter opposite Marshon Lattimore if signed. This is good news. If the Saints were to sign Dre Kirkpatrick, he would end up slotting in as the presumed cornerback 2. Now, of course, there are still questions to answer about Marshon Lattimore and his availability at the beginning of the season, all this other stuff, but let's just assume for right now that Marshon Lattimore is going to be on the field week 1. The role that you're trying to fill is CB2 opposite him. Dre Kirkpatrick would be your clear and presumptive starter at this time. Does it mean that he would become the starter? We don't know that, because although it might take some of the pressure off of Paulson Adebo to develop quickly, he still could. And because of the fact that you're not investing a ton of money in a veteran like Dre Kirkpatrick, it's not a disappointment if he doesn't end up becoming your starting corner. And if he ends up being veteran depth, then that is a very, very good signing for you there as well. So either way it goes, this would be a win for the New Orleans Saints as long as Dre Kirkpatrick does indeed pan out. It alleviates any type of a starting role for a guy like Patrick Robinson or PJ Williams on the outside, and kind of solidifies the depth/special teams role of a guy like Ken Crawley. But we'll talk more about the position in a moment. Let's talk about the fit for right now. Dre Kirkpatrick and Janoris Jenkins are eerily similar in terms of the way that they played, particularly in man coverage in the 2020 season. So just looking at some numbers here from Pro Football Focus, just in terms of raw data, not really grades, but both of them played over 500 total coverage snaps in 2020, 531 for Janoris Jenkins, 506 for Dre Kirkpatrick. Both of them played exactly 219 coverage snaps, so both of them ended up playing right about 40+% in man coverage over the course of the 2020 season. So they're right there in terms of the same amount of usage, 43.3% in man coverage for Dre Kirkpatrick, 41.2% for Janoris Jenkins in New Orleans. That's key because that scheme versatility is something that you need in a corner in New Orleans. It's something that they want as a part of the schematic fit for a guy like Dennis Allen and the defense in New Orleans, and it shows that Dre Kirkpatrick definitely has that. Now, let's look at some more data here. 66% completion percentage allowed by Dre Kirkpatrick in man coverage, 66.7% for Janoris Jenkins. I'm telling you, these guys were eerily similar. Both of them allowed exactly 340 passing yards when targeted in man coverage, and both of them ended up with 2 pass breakups, 1 interception, and 2 touchdowns allowed. It's nuts. It's crazy looking at these two here and how they were so parallel to one another in the 2020 season, and it shows you exactly why it is that Dre Kirkpatrick is the one that's getting the visit right now, because he would be a pretty, I don't want to say he would be a perfect, I don't want to say that he would be a perfect replacement for Janoris Jenkins, because we know Janoris Jenkins is a ball hawk, right? But and Dre Kirkpatrick, as we mentioned, has half the amount of interceptions in almost as many seasons as Janoris Jenkins started his career. So I wouldn't really slap the Dre Kirkpatrick ball hawk title on him, but he does a good job affecting the ball. He does a good job hanging around in man coverage, and he's a schematic fit over on zone coverage as well, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. Now, the big difference here, and something to consider just based upon the number of completions, the quality of completions, quality of coverage, all these other things, if you look at NFL passer rating allowed by both of these players when targeted, Dre Kirkpatrick 90.4, Janoris Jenkins 103.9. So just over 13-point difference there. That's a key thing to keep in mind just in terms of the quality of snaps played. Both of them Dre Kirkpatrick actually targeted a little bit more often than Janoris Jenkins. Janoris Jenkins was targeted once every 5.5 snaps. Meanwhile, Dre Kirkpatrick was targeted once every 4 snaps. So that could just be assignment in terms of who was playing on the primary receiver. A lot of different things go into that. So that's what you're looking at in terms of the man coverage side. Dre Kirkpatrick, a very good fit in terms of replacing a guy like Janoris Jenkins in terms of percentages, production, and ability to affect the pass. Now, over in zone coverage, tells a little bit of a different story. Now, according to Nick Underhill, and this is something to specifically consider here, zone coverage means several different coverages, right? This could be cover 2 zone, this could be cover 3, cover 4, and a couple of other different sort of mixed coverages and things like that, including some transitionary coverages like zone match. But when it comes down to it, if you look specifically at cover 4, Nick Underhill noted that he's performed well there, and that was a primary coverage for the Saints in 2020. Plus, of course, the demonstrated success in man coverage that we just talked about, or demonstrated, let's say, replication in man coverage in terms of being really on par with what Janoris Jenkins did in New Orleans. So take these numbers, understanding that there's 4 or 5 different sort of subcategories within zone coverage that this can also be broken out into, and some of these might not overlap with what the Saints run versus what Cincinnati ran. So just keep that in mind. So let's look at Janoris Jenkins and Dre Kirkpatrick in zone coverage. 54% zone coverage snaps, for Janoris Jenkins, 53.4 for Dre Kirkpatrick. You'll notice that plus the zone coverage percentages we talked about in just a moment ago don't equal up to 100%. That's because there's other things like goal line coverage and stuff like that. So that's the reason why there's some miscellaneous coverages that are in there. Dre Kirkpatrick allowed a 64.9% completion percentage, while Janoris Jenkins allowed a 51.2%. So Janoris Jenkins gets the edge there. Both of them allowing 236 yards allowed by Janoris Jenkins, 289 allowed by Dre Kirkpatrick, but their averages were very close, 11.2 versus 12 yards per catch. But then you get to the production in terms of forced incompletions, things like that. 4 forced incompletions for Janoris Jenkins in zone coverage, 3 pass breakups, 2 interceptions, no touchdowns allowed. But in terms of affecting the ball at the catch point, you only had 1 pass breakup, 1 forced incompletion, but 2 interceptions in zone coverage by Dre Kirkpatrick. So not bad at all. A 66.2 passer rating allowed when targeted. Not at all terrible for Dre Kirkpatrick. It's just that it doesn't quite live up to the 48.4 NFL passer rating allowed by Janoris Jenkins in zone coverage. Now remember, that can adjust and change depending upon what those zone coverages actually are. Janoris Jenkins might have played more quarters coverage in New Orleans than Dre Kirkpatrick, who might excel in quarter coverage, but that might not have been a coverage that was called as much in Cincy. So something to keep in mind there. Both of them targeted right around every 7 snaps or so. So not terrible at all. So it's pretty clear that when you look at Dre Kirkpatrick, he would fit in terms of scheme flexibility, scheme versatility, and the schemes that the Saints would want to run over on the defensive side. So for the fit, I think you absolutely can say Dre Kirkpatrick would be a very, very good choice. Now, we'll talk a bit more about the position, take a look at how this would affect the rest of the position group, as well as what the Saints might still look to do even if they do sign Dre Kirkpatrick. Are they done, or is there more? We'll talk about that as we continue on with another episode of Locked On Saints. And hey, speaking of a good fit, if you're looking for a protein bar, I've got the best schematic fit for you. A lot of versatility, really, really great at the catch point, and delicious and deliciouser than they ever were. Built Bar over at BuiltBar.com. These are my favorite protein bars out on the market, covered in 100% chocolate. They taste like a candy bar, but don't pack all of the additional sugar, and they're just plain delicious as a protein bar. They seriously taste like candy bars. It's pretty incredible. They've got 9 up on the website right now, and they rotate limited edition flavors that you can keep up with only over at BuiltBar.com. So go and check them out and get the best fit in terms of anything that you need when it comes to a protein bar that's out there. 4 or 5 grams of sugar, but still 17, 18 grams of protein, low in carbs, low in calories as well, but high in protein and high in fiber. So go and check them out at BuiltBar.com. Don't forget to use the promo code LOCKED15 so you can get 15% off of your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode with a quick look at the potential signing of Dre Kirkpatrick. Now, we've already broken down the player. We've talked a bit about his history. We talked a bit about his fit, how he fits in as somebody looking to replace Janoris Jenkins at the CB2 position. Now, let's talk about how a potential signing of a guy like Dre Kirkpatrick would affect the rest of the team. Now, we talked about how this would alleviate some of the pressure on Paulson Adebo to develop quickly. Doesn't mean that he can't. It just means that it doesn't become a necessity if Dre Kirkpatrick is in the building, because Dre Kirkpatrick kind of becomes your presumed cornerback 2, your starting cornerback opposite Marshon Lattimore. It also backs some of those other guys off of having to potentially step into that role early on in the season, like Patrick Robinson and PJ Williams. Instead, they can focus a bit more on the positions that they've been playing and the roles that they've been filling over the past couple of seasons as depth pieces, and even the versatility of PJ Williams at safety, particularly when they play those two high safety looks and want to keep Malcolm Jenkins and CJ Gardner-Johnson close to the line of scrimmage. That's been a key point for the Saints' ability to be able to play in those nickel and dime formations on third down with two safeties deep. So you want to keep PJ Williams in that role for certain. You can also look at a guy like Ken Crawley, who a lot of Saints fans kind of went nuts when they signed him and brought him back, but this would further solidify that he is really a guy that's there to help to translate the defense to some of the younger guys, and therefore a special teams and depth role, as opposed to somebody that would challenge for a starting role. So that's a way that it would essentially affect the rest of this cornerback room. It also affects some of the other younger guys like Grant Haley, who really got an opportunity to shine last season in the final game of the season, and Keith Washington, who may have to continue to fight for a roster spot despite being a stud in camp last season. I think even if you sign Dre Kirkpatrick and he doesn't get the starting role because, let's say, Paulson Adebo just goes off in camp and it's hard to keep him off the field because of it, you still have to consider Dre Kirkpatrick affects the rest of the room because he takes up a roster spot from undrafted free agents that are coming in, like a guy like Lawrence Woods, for instance, who's a fantastic special teamer, and then some of those other younger guys like Keith Washington, who we mentioned, who has the speed to be a gunner and play in special teams as well. So that's the way that it affects your room. Now let's talk a little bit about whether or not the Saints are going to be done at the cornerback position. And I'm going to say that even if they sign Dre Kirkpatrick, they're probably not done looking at what can be done at the cornerback position. They'll probably still be inspecting and looking around and having conversations around the NFL. In fact, according to Jeff Duncan in a column that he wrote yesterday, a bit of a mailbag, he talked a bit about this over at The Athletic, saying that the Saints have explored the trade market for some cornerbacks and calling and having conversations with other teams. So this tells us two things. It tells us, first of all, that the Saints expect that they're going to be able to open up some money. We'll talk about that in a moment. But it also tells us that they're continuing to explore what's possible for them at the cornerback position. And I don't think that changes with the signing of Dre Kirkpatrick. They're going to continue to push and continue to try to see what it is that they can continue to bring into the building and challenge for one of those starting roles. Even if they can't execute a trade, this just shows you how they feel about the position of need. Now, just to be clear, no specific names were mentioned in connection to the New Orleans Saints in terms of teams that they called or players that they inquired upon, but there are two players that we know have been sort of lumped into trade talks over, really, in one case, the past couple of off seasons, one of which we've talked about here on the show before, is Stephon Gilmore. The other would be Dolphins cornerback Xavier Howard. Now, I think it's highly unlikely that either of those guys gets traded. Nevertheless, either of them getting traded to the New Orleans Saints, but those are two corners who we've seen rumors about over the offseason, so you wonder if they're a part of the conversation for the New Orleans Saints in terms of who they have called. Doesn't mean that there's any, expansive talks going on, but you just wonder if maybe they are amongst the class of corners that potentially they have reached out about. If so, that's a little bit tough because they're both great fits for New Orleans in terms of the scheme, but those are some pricey guys. I mean, you look at Xavier Howard, if he's traded, you're looking at around $12 million worth of salary cap there. He does have a player option or a player out, let's say, or a team out rather, in 2022 that only carries $2.8 million worth of dead cap, so you can move on from him pretty cleanly after this season. Stephon Gilmore carries a $7 million salary cap, but it seems more likely he's going to want a new deal. He's going to want a lot of money, none of which the Saints can afford at this time, nor would they really be willing to give, I would imagine, considering cornerback one is already in the building with Marshon Lattimore, and they may have to franchise tag him going into next season. So the real question for a guy like Gilmore is, are you okay with playing out your deal at $7 million on the season as one of the better corners in the NFL, and then hitting the market next offseason to try to get a bigger deal. I don't know if really that's something he's going to be interested in doing. Now, in either case, the first point of all of this is that it kind of shows that the Saints are expecting to be able to create some salary cap space because they're exploring any trades. Again, Xavier Howard, and Stephon Gilmore not specifically linked to the Saints, but if you're executing a trade, you're bringing in a salary that somebody else has already negotiated. So that means that you're expecting to be able to open up some more of the salary cap space, whether it's extensions with Marcus Williams or Ryan Ramczyk or otherwise, we don't know. But it seems that there's some confidence there that they want to continue to open up that space and that maybe they're close to getting that done at some point. So we'll keep an eye out on Dre Kirkpatrick as well as his visit with the New Orleans Saints. If he signs, you'll get the news here right away in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Saints. We've also got our midweek fundamentals episodes where we're going to go back over to the defensive side, talk a little bit more about cornerback assignments, and we'll continue on with keeping up to date with everything going on around your New Orleans Saints all throughout the rest of this week, every Monday through Friday, as we continue through the week. And of course, make sure you go and check out Locked On Today to get all of your news around the sports world in less than 20 minutes, available wherever you get your podcasts. As always, y'all, I thank you so much for coming through, for showing support, for showing love. Everything you do to help to grow this family means the world to me, and I really, really, really appreciate all that you've done. We'll be back tomorrow, and don't forget, you can always find me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them, and trust to that nation. I'll holla at you.